They're communicating with us. So we're about to end a little saga here, and we've heard close to 8 vocalizations. All quiet.
Field worker, researcher would be better. He'll tell you.
Whatever, yeah.
Yeah. He's one of those fellows who's very meticulous. We cannot have enough meticulous people out there. Please welcome from British Columbia, Chris Murphy.
Many thanks. Am I okay? I'm doing fine. You know, there's an old saying. If you can't get Muhammad to the mountain, bring the mountain to Muhammad. And that's what I'm going to do here. I had an exhibit at the Vancouver Museum that ran from June of last year right through till February. And I brought in a lot of artifacts, a lot of stuff. And I had 1,800 square feet to put all this stuff up. And a lot of people went through, and maybe some of you who are here went through. But an awful lot of people couldn't make it. So what I did is I photographed all that stuff, everything that was exhibited, all the stuff I got from other universities and from Bigfoot researchers and art galleries and you name it. And I put it all together into a museum tour for you, a virtual museum tour. And I have all the overheads here to show you what I had exhibited. But I've done a little bit more. Dan Perez said in one of his newsletters, when he saw the book, Meet the Sasquatch, and he heard about the exhibit, I wonder what ended up on the clipping room floor. And it's so true. When you do a large project such as this, Meet the Sasquatch and the exhibit, a lot of stuff didn't make it. An awful lot of stuff. And I had basically 3 editors, Tom Steinberg, John Green, and Dave Hancock. And they cut out a lot of stuff. Not because it wasn't good enough, but wasn't as good as other things. And I sort of equate them to that fellow on TV. You know that guy you see that's got all those scissors and he goes around? It's Freddie, the guy with all the scissors. And that's it. That was Freddie Steinberg, Freddie Green, and Freddie Hancock. Because I had gone in with this much stuff, and I came out with about as much as you could put on a postage stamp, believe me. So a lot of it was clipped. And some of it I have included in this presentation just to show you. Now, you can't put everything in a museum, and you can't put everything in a book. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So I'm going to take you on a museum tour, and I'm going to take you off every now and then into the clipping room, right, to see the stuff that was clipped. And there's quite a few little things. And here we are at the Vancouver Museum, and I hope everybody can see this, and at the right-hand corner, that was the entrance to the museum, and we had a large cutout, etc., of the Sasquatch, and it went around in a big circle, and all the items were exhibited in a large circle, and in the middle, we had John Green's office. It was sort of based on John Green. So it went around in a circle with all the artifacts, starting off sort of historically, going back to the real old stuff, and then grouping around and all the classics, etc. And in the center, we had John Green's computer in there with all his database. And you could actually go in and work the computer and check on all the sightings. It had something like 4,000 sightings set up on that computer. The first item you ran across was the stone head. And this is the first stone head. It was the only one I could get. There are 6 stone heads. I'll show you the others in a minute. 6 stone heads that anthropologists claim were made in the resemblance of possible Sasquatch. Right? There's actually 6 or maybe even 7. This one came from the University of Oregon. They shipped it up to me. And they said that that image shows an ape-like creature. And this goes back thousands of years, right? We're going back a few thousand years. And we know there are no apes in North America, or at least we don't think there are, other than the Sasquatch. So it has been determined that that is, in fact, the image of a Sasquatch. This is called the stone foot, and it is a carving in stone of a footprint, or a foot. And it's undetermined age. It goes back thousands of years. And it has been determined that that could also be patterned after the footprint of a Sasquatch, carved in stone. Now, I've done some work on it, and I'll show you some work that I've done on that so you can see a little bit better. The Indian or Native First Nations masks that I had displayed, and you can see them here. This came from the Provincial Museum in British Columbia, and it is said to be an image of a Sasquatch. This one is very, very amazing. It's in the book, and this is the Chehalis First Nations mask. It was made in the 1930s, and in 1934 it was donated to the museum, and Ambrose Point was the artist. Now you notice something about these masks. These two, as you will see, are not painted. They're not painted, which leads us to believe that they could be based on the real creature. This one is painted, so now there's this thing on out, there it is. This one came from Alaska. Robert Alley loaned me this, and it is also of a Sasquatch. The buckwas is what they call it. But it is painted, so when I see them painted like that, I feel it's more mythological than it is natural. This is the gadget, and I think Rob Alley referred to this, and does it have a relation with the Sasquatch? Well, sort of. It's another one of those creatures in Indian lore that inhabits the bush. Let me just show you a little bit more about the stone foot, because it's a rather interesting artifact, and as I say, it's owned by the Vancouver Museum. Dr. Krantz went up there and analyzed it. John Green analyzed it. I took photographs of it, and I think I got that the right way around. Yes, there it is. That's the back, and that's the front. And what I did here was to try and, it's broken off at the bottom here, so we don't really know how long it was. But I sort of took this half and photographed it, turned it around, and I think it's around 12 or 13 inches. So that's possibly what it looked like when it was real. The museum records it as a medicine man's bowl because it has kind of a bowl in here, you see. It's a bit of a bowl. But John Green and Dr. Grover Krantz looked at it and feel that it definitely might be associated with the Sasquatch. I'll just touch the stone heads again so you know what they all look like. Now, it's not me saying that these look like Sasquatch. It's anthropologists saying that, okay? That's the front view and side view of the famous stone heads. And as I say, I think there's 6 or 8 of them. And the reason that they claim that they could possibly be Sasquatch is because not only do they sort of look like apes, and they all sort of look like other things as well, but there are carvings of actual creatures like sheep and goats and things like that that do show and look like sheep and goats. So the question is, why did those native people 5,000 years ago or whatever carve things that look like that? The idea, of course, being, from our point of view, that they could have been trying to depict Sasquatch creatures. Now, the only thing that bothers me is that native people are usually very good artists, and some of these are not that good at depicting. I would have thought perhaps they could have been a little more lifelike. The other thing that we got into in the exhibit was the petroglyphs, and the petroglyphs that may show or do show Sasquatch creatures. And this is up in Bella Coola. I went up there myself and had a look at the petroglyphs in Bella Coola. There's also petroglyphs in British Columbia. These ones are quite interesting. This is Bella Coola, or up, and then you have to go up into the bush and walk up in this trail and way up into the mountains. And lo and behold, you come into these petroglyphs. Now, we don't even know how old they are. We think they're 10,000 years plus. We don't even know who carved them. They were not carved by the Bella Coola people. That has been definitely established. They had to be carved by somebody, and it could be that some of these faces may depict, and I put this one, this is a particular one, because there are human-like faces, and then there's these other ones that have these funny mouths and funny noses and things like that. So it's a possibility. Bella Coola, incidentally, is notorious for Sasquatch. Clayton Mack lived up there and went into the bush, and he has all sorts of stories. He has books on it. Bella Coola is a prime area for Sasquatch. And so what you see here are some of the Bella Coola petroglyphs. Now, there's also petroglyphs down in New Mexico, and Robert Morgan sent me these. And there is a petroglyph of a big foot, and there is the stone foot right behind it. Now, you notice the stone foot hasn't got a big toe. It broke off somewhere down the line, probably kicked somebody. Anyway, it hasn't got a big toe, but this one is very similar to this one. And there's another footprint there, and that watch shows you how large it is. Other petroglyphs show whistling creatures, and we know the Sasquatch is notorious for whistling. You've heard all sorts of stories, and this is a whistling Sasquatch here. It's supposed to be a petroglyph of a Sasquatch. On the pictographs, I know you have probably seen these, but this is Kathy Moskowitz in the Stoneless National Forest down in California, and she did work on these pictographs that are in a cave. You can see there's the opening in a cave, and she has determined that this is the hairy man, and she drew these neat pictures, and that is a woman, and that is a child. And she got the stories from the native people about the hairy man that inhabited the woods, and there's a lot of native folklore about this creature. But they talk about it as a real creature. So more on those neat First Nations masks. Now this one I could not get. I could not get that one. The museum is in Toronto, Peabody Museum. And before I could display any of this material, I had to go to the First Nations people and get their permission to put it on display in writing. Even though the museum has the stuff, they just can't give it to you. You've got to write to the First Nations people and get their permission. I did get permission for this one. I couldn't get permission, I couldn't find this one, but this one I knew where it was, and it is really an ape. You can see that that's an ape, that's not a human being. I went to the First Nations people and said, the museum has approved me to have that mask brought in and exhibited at Vancouver. Can I please have your permission? And the First Nations people said, well, we really don't want you to use it. And this, he said, was important. He said, we hold it in high reverence because our people, in quotes, our people have a belief in mountain monkeys. Is there such a thing as a mountain monkey? What is a mountain monkey? Our people have a belief in mountain monkeys, and we'd rather hold this mask somewhat sacred, and we would prefer that you didn't put it in your exhibit. So naturally, I didn't put it in. But that is probably one of the best. I don't know when it was made. It was found around the turn of the century, from my knowledge, around 1900. It was found along with several others. So there is a side view and a full view of that particular mask. And this one is from the same people, Nishka people. It's from the same people, and it looks like a monkey boy. If you look at it, it looks more like a monkey boy. And we believe that these artifacts were carved particularly in reference to Sasquatch. And this is the little bit better picture for you here of Ambrose Point's mask that he carved at the Chehalis First Nations reservation in British Columbia. And it's got bear hair. And you notice some things about this. Notice the wide area between the nose and the mouth. This is before the Patterson film. He didn't have any clue, right, about the Patterson film. But he carved it, and a lot of the characteristics are very close to the Patterson film. The nose and the drop-off chin, and this distance in here, this sort of flat nose and no bridge. And I sort of compared the Patterson film, and it's very close. It's very close. It's very large, too. You can see that's Lynn Miranda's hands there. You can see how large it is. It is like a life-size mask. And just to give you a little bit more before we'll leave the First Nations mask, this is Robert Alley's mask that he loaned me for the exhibit. And I found out that there is an area up in here, and Robert could probably say more about it, up near Thomas Bay, where there was a very famous situation that happened up in there. Prospectors went up into this area, and they were scared away by some kind of a creature, and it's all written up in various magazines. And the native people up there refer to the creature as the Gadget, G-A-G-I-T. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but something like that. So this creature, the buck wasp, apparently scared away all these prospectors, and some of them went a little nuts about this. It's quite a story, and incidentally, all these stories will be put together in the Sasquatch Chronicle, which I'm putting together, and a lot of you know something about that. Naturally, at any exhibit, I had to go and look at some of the classics, the Sasquatch classics. And you'll recognize them, those of you who have been hanging around in the Sasquatch field for a while. This is the Yale, British Columbia, capture of the Sasquatch boy, Fred Beck. I had Albert Osmond's original book that he wrote, Historian. We all know about Albert Osmond getting kidnapped and spent 6 days, and we've heard a song about it. Well, we have his original notebook, and I had that on display as well, where he wrote down his story, and John has reprinted that in some of his books. And there's Albert Osmond with Rene de Hinden, and that's the Ruby Creek incident. Remember that? That's Rene de Hinden stepping over the fence at Ruby Creek, and also the William Rowe, and of course Jerry Crew. So I had stories about each one of them, and I can show you some more particulars about some of those stories. And some artwork that's going to appear in the Chronicle. Don't pay any attention to that one. It's wrong. I've got the right one here. This is some artwork I have done. It's going to appear in the Chronicle about the Yale story where the train came around the track, etc., and found the Sasquatch boy laying on the side and the whole story associated with it. This is a photograph that few people know about, but this is the ape Indian. That's Fred Beck and Smith, Marion Smith, I believe. They went back and reenacted that with one of the sheriffs down in the little town, Kelslow, after they came out of the area when their cabin was raided by Sasquatch with rocks, and we all know that. They came out frightened and everything, and they went back up there and reenacted it, and that's a photograph of basic reenactment. This, a lot of people don't know, but Albert Osmond had a drawing done. I'm not sure who did the drawing, but he said that's what the creatures looked like. Osmond did not believe that the creatures looked anything like the creature we see in the Patterson film. He had his own ideas. I saw an artist by the name of Craig Camp. He sent me this, and I said, gosh, that looks awfully close to what Osmond was trying to draw, and put that in there for reference. Oh, I want to show you this. I went up to Yale, and I clocked exactly the 20 miles from the city limits in Yale, and I took a photograph of the railway track where the Yale incident, the Sasquatch boy caught in 1884 and never arrived back at its destination in New York. It was sent for a sideshow and the whole story. But that's exactly where it happened, and I just took this photograph a few sunny days ago, actually. Parked the car here, stood up. That's exactly 20 miles. So you can see it is a cliffy area, and if the Sasquatch fell off of anything, it was probably off of here or off of one of these little cliffs and whatnot over here. That's exactly where the Yale incident took place. A few more bits and pieces about the classics. We had the drawing done of the William Rowe incident. That was William Rowe who had his daughter do a drawing, and we blew that up to 6 feet. And actually, last year when we went to Willow Creek, and we gave that to the Willow Creek Museum, but that's a 6-foot depiction. I had it scanned and made into 6 foot, and that's me standing beside it. So that's what I would look like standing, and that's what he says she was, about 6 feet tall. So it's all done proportionally. So that sort of shows you what it would look like if I was standing beside that creature. This is the little town. It's always hard to pronounce this name unless you're French. Tate, Jean, whatever, Cachet. And there it is there. Find me a French person, please. That is the mountain. I went up there and took photographs. Now, this is Mica Mountain, right? So when you hear about this guy walked up to the top of the mountain, you can see that all that is a very gentle slope mountain. That's it there. That's Mica Mountain. So he was working on the road. William Rowe was working on the roads going in there back in the early 50s, mid-50s, and he decided one day, and he walked up that same old story, and then all of a sudden that it hit, and the thing came to within about 20-odd feet of his position, and it was eating berries and branches and all this other stuff, and he watched it for quite a long time, said he could have shot it, but didn't. This is a depiction. Now, Roger Patterson's got this in his book, but Roger Patterson was not the original author. It was a guy by the name of Kunzler. Roger copied it. Roger put his name on it, but Roger did a good job. And this is what was depicted as the Rowe incident. Here we have William Rowe, and he's got the thing in the sights of his rifle, but he decided not to shoot because the creature looked too human, and he insisted on that. Unfortunately, none of us ever interviewed Rowe. He moved from Surrey to Edmonton or Alberta, somewhere in Steinberg's backyard, but none of us ever got to interview him. I know John Green communicated with him for a while, but I don't have a photograph. If anybody knows William Rowe, I would love to have a photograph of William Rowe, because his story of the sighting at that location is one of the best stories that we have. The Ruby Creek incident was another great story, and these are photographs. Many of them belong to John and some to myself. I've been up and thoroughly researched the Ruby Creek, which is not far from Harrison Hot Springs. That was the original house, and these are shots of the house, and the one at the bottom is sort of an aerial view, which is a very good photograph of the house that the Chapmans lived in. And it was Jenny Chapman was in the house alone, and her husband worked on the railway, which runs right by the place, actually. And one day her children came running in and said, "There's a big cow in the yard." She had three young children. And she looked up and she couldn't believe her eyes. There was a Sasquatch coming towards her house. So she grabbed her children and she ran. She put a blanket over their heads, actually. And she ran up the tracks to where her husband was working. And he went back and they found very large footprints, etc. in the area. And she explains that a Sasquatch had come and visited her. About a week later, or 2 weeks later, they moved out of that house because they were spooked, because this thing kept coming back. Their dogs were agitated. They could hear strange noises in the night. They were really spooked, and they left that house, and it went to ruin, and there you see it. Now, many years later, a lady by the name of Deborah Schneider, who is a relative of the Chapmans, Jenny Chapman, she and her husband David built this house, right? It's on the other side. They built the house there. There's the old house, and that's the new house. So I went up to see Deborah, and I took a lot of pictures. Those two trees are really all that's left of the original site, but you can see they've grown considerably, way up like that. And just a little mystery, I went out the back, and that big tree right there, that big tree way up high, and that probably 15 feet up, is an axe that's been there forever, dug into the tree, and you can see the tree has grown around the axe. You couldn't get it out. It's dug right in. You have to look up. It's right up here. You can sort of see a handle coming out here. I tried to get a photograph, and naturally, hardly turned out. That's the Ruby Creek incident, which is another major incident in Sasquatch lore. Okay, now we're going around to the casts, and I had all of the casts on display. And you can see they're all here, so you could actually stand on them. They were in plastic, thick plastic boxes, and you could stand on them and compare your feet. And there's the film site model, which I have on display here, which you may take photographs if you wish. Now, this was Erskine Payton, and he is the Nightline guy. He operates out of Vancouver Island, and he has a radio program which is broadcasted from Vancouver Island up to a satellite and down to the New York area, eastern seaboard. He used to live in Arizona. He took a trip up here once, came into Canada, got over to Vancouver Island, and decided, this is where I want to be. So he moved up here, lock, stock, and barrel, and that's where he lives now. And he called me, and I've been on his radio program quite a few times. It's at night, and it carries on for hours, and we talk about Bigfoot and many things. Dave Hancock's been on. He's a very, very nice fellow. He came over to visit me, went through the museum, and just one thing of note here, I'm not going to get into talking about people and events, but you know these guys, Carl Korff and the other fellow that worked with Mr. Long on his book? Well, these radio guys, you know, they get to know an awful lot of stuff. They really do. I mean, that's their job. And he has told me stuff about those characters, you know, that they are not exactly your leading citizens. And so when it comes from a guy like that, I believe it. I believe it. All of the footprint casts are in Meet the Sasquatch. I'm just going to flash these up, just so you know, and to give you just some brief stuff. These are all the casts that were on display. It was the biggest display, I think, of casts that has been held. Of course, I haven't been to any other museums. There haven't really been that many. But some of the casts were originals. Some of them were copies that I had made. We got Jerry Crew's cast and Blue Creek Mountain. All of these are in Meet the Sasquatch. This was a cast given to me. I believe it was made by Patterson. I believe it's an original. It's got little rocks in it and everything. I couldn't find any dermal ridges or what might be dermal ridges. This was Dr. John Bindernagel. He loaned a cast to the museum, and that's from Vancouver Island. And, of course, the famous Abbott Hill cast. I only put the best ones in here, naturally. There's tons of other casts, but the best ones went in. And this is a remarkable cast, one of the best I've seen. That comes out of Ohio, and it's just taken a couple of years ago. I forget the date, 2 years ago, 2002, 2003. And it was a couple walking in the state park, Wayne National Forest. No, Shawnee State Park. That's it, Shawnee. And they happened to see some large footprints, and they called one of these hotlines, you know, where you report things like that. And the hotline took the information and they gave it to Jody Cook, who is an Ohio investigator, and Jody drove down to the park and got some plaster, and he went out and he made that cast. And it's, you know, you don't see as much with a photograph, but it's on display down at the Museum of Mysteries in Seattle, and it's almost like the Hereford cast, very detailed, about 15 inches, beautiful cast. There's the Steinberg cast from up in the Chilliwack River area and Bluff Creek, and of course the Titmus casts and all these ones from Highampton. These are John Green's casts that were taken in those areas back in the 60s. And some of the casts that you see on this table here, those Cripplefoot casts, those are the originals. They were taken by Rene de Hinden in 1969 in Bossburg. We all know the story of the Bossburg sighting. There were 1,000 footprints found, and they appeared to be an individual who had a crippled foot. And Dr. Krantz did extensive research on those casts, and he drew the bone structure, which is a little bit perhaps not as correct as it could be, and perhaps Dr. Meldrum will explain that. Anyway, he did draw the bones, and those casts that I have on this table over here are the original ones that Rene de Hinden took in Bossburg. All of the stuff I have here is the original stuff, as I worked with Eric de Hinden, who got all of his father's stuff after Rene died. So that's and those are the bones on the, these are done by bone clones, and it shows the actual bones in the casts. And of course, the rest of them are from the film site, and the ones taken by Bob Titmus. Now, Matt was talking recently, or just this morning, about dermal ridges on casts, and this is what those perhaps dermal ridges might look like on that cast. That's how they blow up, like that. They kind of look like dermal ridges to me. I don't know. We've done a lot of work on it. This is the Onion Mountain. We originally thought this came from Blue Mountain, but it didn't. It came from Onion Mountain, and this has been now sorted out. And when you look at the cast and these neat photographs by Dr. Meldrum, and you blow up the cast, you get that kind of a thing, and you can see little breaks and little bits. I don't know. Perhaps they could be artifacts, I suppose, or perhaps some are, but those ones look pretty neat to me. So I don't know. Same as Matt, I don't really know. I think somebody was talking Dr. Pye was talking yesterday about feet and what they look like, and so what I did is I took a Patterson cast, and I think when you take a cast, you should compare a cast with a cast. Don't compare a cast with a foot. Casts are always bigger than your foot, and I wrote a big thing on this in Meet the Sasquatch. They're always quite a bit bigger because they have to be, because when you put your foot in there, the hole that it makes has to be bigger than what you put in, and it expands somewhat. So I made a cast of my own foot, and then I compared it to a cast of the Patterson film site. So there is the configuration of my toes, all neatly put together in a shoe, as you can see. I suppose if I didn't wear shoes, they would probably spread out somewhat. I'm sure they would. The reason our toes all go together like that is because we force them together in shoes, I would think. But that's what my toes look like, and that is what the toes on the Patterson film site casts look like. Different kind of toes. I have got my film site model here, but I'm just going to walk you around it. And this model was done based on what information we had about where all these items were, all these objects were. And when you look at the film frames, it doesn't look anything like this. They're all kind of jammed up together. But that's basically what the film site looked like. We've recently discovered that new papers, that this stump should have been back here, and this stump should have been back here, and this tree in the middle here should have been back there, about there, more even with this leaning tree. So there are a couple of things, but the distance of the creature from where it was filmed, which is down here, which is about 102 feet, that's where Patterson was when he took his movie. Now, actually, he was way over here somewhere, and he ran all the way up here, and he put his foot on this. And don't forget, Patterson was only 5'2", and he went down like this, and even smaller. So when you see the film frames, all of this stuff sort of crowds into the foreground and looks like it's all jammed up. But Patterson was here. The creature came out of here and walked along here. And we were talking about Bob Gimlin jumping off a stump, and I think that's the stump that Bob jumped off right there. Bob jumped off to see if his foot would sink in as deeply as that of the creature's footprint. So Bob went up here, because the tracks were going right along here, so naturally he's going to find a stump that's near the tracks. He's not going to walk a mile. So those guys were taking the casts of the tracks right along. They got to kind of curve this, right? It sort of came out of there and it went out, and you can sort of see it going by this leaning tree. And when you look at the film and you see all those trees in the foreground, what you're looking at, all those trees are the trees that are in here. They're not, it's kind of clear back there, actually. But when Patterson is filming this thing, he is filming from here. It's just a tangled mess. I mean, I'm showing it as best I can on a model, but it's branches and thorns. You couldn't run through it. You couldn't run through it. So as the creature went by there, it knew that you couldn't get a shot at it through there. I mean, it's full of little branches. You can see in the film, it sort of disappears and appears between bushes and things like that. So it was on fairly safe ground by moving straight ahead. And just for the record, here are the actual now numbers associated with the film site, just how far everything was from everything else. Okay, it was about 190 feet, not 160, and I have now straightened this out. Whether I'm going to make a new model or not, for the sake of two stumps, I'm not really sure. In September, we went to the film site after the conference in Willow Creek, and that is myself down at the film site, and there's Dan Perez and the whole group of us, and right next to the film site where these fellows are standing here, over here, it's all cut away. It's not there anymore. The film site is not there. Only half of it is there. Maybe a third of it, it's cut away, and I can show you what happened there. I'll show you the cutaway first. Here is the cutaway, right? That's what it looks like now, right? I'm standing down in it, all of this, and I would be standing back up. This is a big hole in here. Rocks, logs, you name it. And what, in my opinion, happened here, there is the film site in 1972, and here is also a shot in that same year with a cute little guy standing down here. That's Martin DeHinden standing down there in the film site. Well, this is Bluff Creek, quiet little Bluff Creek. And when we were down there, it was a little babbling brook. You didn't even have to take off your shoes. You could tiptoe across, and your feet would dry in 20 minutes in the California sun. What appears to me to have happened is this little creek, which comes down out of here, it can swell up to 10 times its size in minutes, because all of those mountains feed into these creeks. And this water, this creek, got too big. It came rushing down here, couldn't make this turn, and it just went in here and just took out this whole area. And it's now a big hole. It's all gone. You can't find these trees or anything down there. The whole thing is gone. When we went to the film site, in my estimation, we were probably standing somewhere over in here. And then that big hole that I showed you comes right in here and around here. And so this is all gone. The creek, when we were there in June, is another, it's just a little babbling brook. It's wonderful. Birds sing and it rattles through there. But in 5 minutes, you can be in real trouble. As Bob Gimlin knows, when that started to rain on night, it doesn't give up. It's like Vancouver, right? It doesn't give up. That rain came down, and it will just take out roads. We have roads taken out all the time up on the Whistler Highway up there. I mean, 1 minute you're going through there, it's beautiful. Next minute, the road is gone. It's gone. So this brighter. So it's pretty rough. It's pretty rough down in California when it rains. Beautiful in California any other time, but when it's rained. As I say, there's little Martin standing down at the field. You can see Rene DeHinden's stuff over here. There's his gun. And Rene did a lot of measurements. You see all these little bits of tape and things. So Rene, when he went to the film site, he took along one of those big, long surveyor's tapes. You know, those really long ones. And he measured everything, and he wrote these things down. Now, a lot of the stuff didn't come to light till lately, so we didn't really know. Now, one of the things at the film site that Rene picked up and did his measurements on were this. The wood fragment. And you've probably heard all sorts of things about the wood fragment. The creature stepped on or nearly stepped on the wood fragment, and it was about there. And you see in the film sites, you can see it comes along, and then it takes a step, and then there's an actual film frame where it's about a step or so behind it, right about there. That is the wood fragment. Now, I have said in the past that I wasn't sure if it was the same wood fragment, because when Rene went down there, it was 1972, not 1967. And he compared the film frame 352, to the actual film, and he noticed that this fragment was still in place. And he said, that is the fragment. And he took photographs, okay? He took photographs. I have the photographs that he took of the film site with this thing in place, with this fragment in place. And it wasn't until recently, until I started doing these film site models and working around with all these numbers, that I determined, yes, that is the same fragment. In my opinion, it was definitely the fragment that the creature stepped on when it went across that sandbar on October the 20th, 1967. Now, in my wisdom, I determined we don't have anything, we don't have much to determine the heights of the creature. We got its footprints, which we assume are associated, which were directly associated with it, and a few other things. And I determined or said that perhaps the could be used to determine its heights, because you've got it in the same photograph. And I did calculations on that. And when you work it out, if I stand up here, you can see how many wood fragments does Chris Murphy is 6 feet tall. This wood fragment is 26.25 inches. So you can sort of say 1 wood fragment, 2 wood fragments, 3 wood fragments, and you could come up with an estimate of my height based on that. But don't forget, you got camera angle involved, you know, are we getting the exact size, etc. I kind of put all those things aside and said, yes, we are. It's close enough that we can do that. I get a lot of criticism on this, but I don't care. And one thing I have learned to do, when it comes to mathematics, as soon as you take a number and do anything with it, the possibility of making errors skyrockets, and I don't care what it is. I remember one day I went over to Rene's place. He was doing something. I went into his little kitchen sort of thing, and I'm sitting at the table. He was off in he didn't have another room, it was another section of the trailer, and he yelled to me, he said, "Hey, Murphy, how many squares on that piece of paper in front of you?" And there was a piece of paper in front of me. It was a grid. It had 4 squares across the top and it had 5 squares down. I looked at the piece of paper and I said, 20. It was dead silence for a minute. He comes wandering in and he looks to me and says, "How'd you do that so fast?" I said, "Rene, listen, there are 4 across and there's 5 down. 4 times 5 is 20. I said, "That's how I did it." And what he said to me, and listen carefully, he looked at me and he said, "I don't like that stuff." And he picked up the piece of paper and he counted 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, for many years, I laughed at that. Many, many years. And then I started thinking about it, right? How many times have you messed up using mathematics to do something when you should have gone over and counted? How many times you've tried to cut a piece of wood to fit into something and you've said, 32 inches, you cut the piece of wood and you're too short. And then you cut a piece of wood, it's too long. What you eventually do is you take the piece of wood that you're going to cut, you put it up there and you draw a pencil line exactly. You don't use a ruler, don't use math. You go up there and you say 32 and you cut 23. How many times has that happened, right? Right? Happened to me. So what the carpenter does now, he takes his piece of wood, he puts it in the hole, right? He takes a pencil and he draws a pencil line, and like my father always says, cut it, but leave the pencil line. You can always make something a little shorter. It's damned hard to make it longer, right? Rene was of the firm opinion that all of our mathematics associated with the creature were not good, because there were too many errors. And his opinion was that in those days, and I had offered doing it, if we're going to see what size the creature is, how big its shoulders are, etc., we should blow it up like that picture you see on the wall over there and measure it directly. So when I do calculations now, I heed Rene. I don't really show mathematics. There is the wood fragment, and each one of those little boxes is exactly the same size as the wood fragment. And now I got this thing I got to try and work out again. There's the wood fragment there. That box is the same size as that box. So 1, 2, 3, and 7 inches. I came up with, if you use the wood fragment, and if you believe that it is the wood fragment, and if the camera is reasonably correct, I know it's not. It's off a little bit, but not a hell of a lot. If you believe, right, then it would take that many wood fragments and that portion of a wood fragment to make up whatever it was when it walked across there. And that would be its walking height, not its standing height. That's its walking height. Although, in this particular frame, you can see it's pretty straight. It's not bent over. It's not bent right over. So you have a pretty good walking height for the creature there. And I came up with 85.75. And that's pretty damn close to what Glickman had come up with. And so it's reasonably confirmed if the fragment is the same fragment and we don't have to justify too much of the camera. Now, Dr. Doolittle, Dr. Dingling, he says, Murphy, how come you didn't use the foot? How many times have I used the foot, right, to make measurements on the creature in his book, right? How many times have I used the foot in the last 10 years? And originally, this is one of the first things I ever did. Of course, Dr. Dingling didn't do any checking. All he did is went and found a bunch of garbage cans and went in there and pulled out old emails. He did nothing. An absolute atrocity, right? I used the foot many years ago, and I did that. Now, here again, you know, you can't be 100% right. The foot is a bit further back from the body, and you're not sure the camera angle, but when you do it exactly, and every one of those little notches is, of course, 1 inch, right? Then you come up with 73, 74, go right to the top here. 70, 71, 71, 72, sorry, 7, what am I doing here? 7 feet, there's 7 feet, 1, 2, 3 inches, right? That's what it comes out, and that's using that foot. Now, I'm not sure if I got that exactly right down here. I'm not sure if that's exactly, and I could, you know, you can fudge around, and yeah, it's easy to do, but I'm not sure. But if you use the foot, but the foot is not right under the creature. It's not completely in his body. It's like the wood fragment. It's a way back, right? So we got camera angle and we got all sorts of things creeping in here. So we're really not sure whether or not that is 100% correct. But it's another little thing. What I did with the stick is decided to try and measure the size of that lamp using the stick. So that you got to forgive this a bit. That should be moved over. I couldn't get the computer to do it exactly, but that adds up to that. And I measured that stick and worked out a ratio to determine how high this lamp was in my hallway. And the actual height of the lamp was 64.5, and I come up with 60, and my calculation said 65.29, so I was out an inch. So it does work, but don't forget I'm perfectly straight there. Was the wood fragment the real wood fragment? Well, there's the photograph that DeHinden took in 1972. That is from the film frame. There it is there. He drew that circle. That's the wood fragment he picked up. And when you take the camera to this angle, it works perfectly. There's the creature and the wood fragment. So I believe it is the same wood fragment, but not good enough. Let's go further. How could a wood fragment of that size stay at the film site from 1967 to 1972? Only a little piece of wood. Not very big, is it? 26 inches. How could that hang around at a film site for 4 years with all the information I'm telling you about how wild it is in California with all the rains and winds and stuff like that? Remarkably, Peter Byrne went down there in 1972 and he took a photograph. Here's the photograph taken in 1972, and here's the photograph taken in 1967. All of these arrows are wood fragments that are exactly the same. They're all there. All exactly the same ones. If you look at them with a magnifying glass, you can tell that they're all the same ones. Now, those are the ones in the foreground, and if you look at the ones at the bottom here, this is in the background, there's 1972, there's 1967, all those pieces of wood, there's that big one hanging down. Nothing happened down there from 1967 to 1972, and that's the way it goes in the California wilderness. You never know when something's going to come and rip the whole place apart. You just don't know. And nothing happened in those years. I bet you I could find 50 pieces of wood that were identical in both of those photographs. So I'm reasonably convinced that that wood fragment, you can't see it, it's just back here, is the same wood fragment that's in the Patterson film, the one we're looking at here. Then I get criticized for doing a calculation on the creature's heel. Why would you use the heel? Why didn't you use the foot? Why did you use the heel? People ask me that. Now, anybody with half a brain will know that if you're standing like this on one foot, all of your weight is on the foot you're standing on. It's right in the center of gravity. It can't be anywhere else. If your weight's over there, you're going to fall over. So, a picture of the creature's heel, and it's standing on it. So it's completely and totally in the body plane, and the camera is almost directly behind it, right? In one of the frames. Kind of hard to see, but when you got good prints, and I got good stuff, right, you can kind of point, you can kind of look at this, correct? So, if we go down the bottom here, that's its heel right there. Now, this is not an exact science because, you know, you can make it a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, but you can use your brain. And I'm having damn trouble with this thing. Anyway, that is the heel. That's the foot that it's standing on, right there. So again, I'm not using mathematics. I take the little circles, right, follow the Hinton principle, put all the little circles up there, and then at that 17.5 circles, how wide is the heel? There's the cast, and I came up, well, it's between 4.5, 4.75, or it could be up to 5 inches if you really want to push it. You know, there's the cast, and that's a good cast, right? And I did the calculation here and said, okay, if it's 4.75, 83.12 inches. So it's over 80 inches, right? I can prove it with the stick. I can prove it with the heel. And that doesn't match up to 6 feet. It's much larger than 6 feet. Now you got, in this particular frame, you got a lot of stoop here. You see the creature's bending over. In this frame, it's standing up, perfectly straight. If you take all of these frames and look at them, it's bobbing up and down, right? As it walks like this. It kind of bobs up and down. So in this particular instance, again, I used the heel because it was standing on it. And I didn't have to use anything else. I didn't need camera distance. I didn't need anything else to make that calculation. I just needed that and the cast. The same thing with the wood fragment. I don't need camera distance to do anything. I don't have to depend upon these dubious factors. How far was the creature? 102 feet, 115, 30, whatever. I don't have to depend on that. I can use C, and that is the best way to do any particular calculation. Okay, off of that subject, some of the other museum items that I had the original Fort Bragg hand. That's the Fort Bragg hand. That was traced by a fellow who saw the creature come along and stick its big hand on the side of his white portable building. And he went up and he traced it. And that's my hand compared to the Fort Bragg hand. And these are stuff I had on display of hand casts and knuckle casts and whatnot, not too good. And I had the arm from the movie Sasquatch, which is a lousy movie. Anyway, terrible, but the arm was good, right? And I had that on display, along with the foot that I made to see if we could see what a foot would look like from the top instead of from the bottom, and an illustration by Yvonne Leclerc showing that when we look at casts, we're looking at the bottom of the foot, not the top of the foot. You can appreciate that. And I didn't have this particular cast on display because it belongs to Tom Powell, but that's Tom Powell and I, and that particular cast, I believe, is one of the originals hand casts that Freeman had made. Below is the actual Sasquatch arm, and you can see it's quite well done, although I'm not so sure that it looks like a Sasquatch's hand. Perhaps it needs a little more fur or whatever, but that's how big it was. That particular arm extension cost $10,000 to make. And it is quite remarkable because you put your hand up inside of it and you put your fingers in these little rings. And when you work your fingers like that, then the hand itself opens and closes. So it's a remarkable prop. Now, you will recall in the movie Sasquatch, they only used it for about 14 seconds, or not even that. You know, pretty girl in her little bed there in the camp, and all of a sudden this thing sneaks under and grabs her ankle. But you only see about 2 seconds of it. So $10,000 is an awful lot of money to pay for 2 seconds. But that is the hand. That's the Sasquatch hand. It's kind of interesting. Now, I'm going to put this up here because I think it's interesting. And I didn't have it on display at the museum because I had too much static on it as to what it was. And it's called the Bentonville Handcast, and I have it over here on display if you want to look at it. Actually, I have it here. This is called the Bentonville Handcast. It's quite dry. Whether it's a hoax, probably. I don't know. What happened? Where did it come from? Okay, here's the story. The Bentonville Handcast, from beginning to end. 2 ladies in Bentonville, Ohio, which is down in Adams County, way down south, heard some unusual noises outside their little portable building, right? So they had a fit. Their name were Greer. Dana and Greer, G-R-E-E-R, Dana and another lady. So they phoned the police and said, hey, they're not only, they look out and they heard these weird noises, moaning and kind of crying coming from the bush. Ohio's got a lot of bush. And then they looked out and they said, there's a big man running around out here, a big man. So they got scared, so they phoned the local sheriff. Naturally, it's the first thing we do, right? Phone the local sheriff. So he went running down there, pacified the ladies, okay, looked around, flashlight, look here, look there. Couldn't see anything, couldn't find anything. Said, well, we can't find anything, but, we'll keep our eyes open, and if you hear anything further, give us a call. And by the way, we've had calls like this before, and maybe you should call a guy to come down and have a look. And they gave Dana Greer Jody Cook's name. And Jody Cook lives in Cincinnati. Some of you have heard of Jody Cook. He's the Ohio guy that does research in Ohio. I've written a book with Jody Cook, and I'm updating it, Bigfoot Encounters in Ohio. So next day or thereabouts, Jody went down. Now, in the meantime, the girl told her brother, his name is Tony Greer, about the incident. Tony went out there. He's a hunter. And he does animal tracking and all. Like all sorts of hunters in Ohio. I mean, that's, there's tons of waste areas there. You can shoot anything you want. Tony went out and looked around and he saw what he thought was a handprint and a footprint. So he made this cast. He's made casts before of animal prints. That's his hobby. He made that cast of the handprint that he had found, right? Now, when Jody got down there, he gave Jody the cast. When Jody got it back, he determined what had happened in talking to them. And it seemed the creature went along, came to a ravine, it went over, and it jumped up that little ravine like this, okay? And it put its hand down onto a branch, and it pressed, that branch was found pressed quite firmly into the ground. So its thumb did not go into the ground. Only its 4 fingers went into the ground, right? So that's basically what it looked like when its hand was on the branch. So you only get that part, correct? So Jody took the cast, and then sometime later he was looking at it very closely, and he noticed that there were dermal ridges on it, right? He took some photographs of it. These are his photographs. And he phoned me and he said, Chris, I got this cast. It was taken a couple of years ago, and we haven't really bothered with it, and it's been sitting around. He said, I took some photographs of it, and I blew them up, and I saw dermal ridges. There's dermal ridges. There are definitely dermal ridges, okay? So I said, send me the photographs, please. So he sent me the photographs, and these are very large, 8 by 10 photographs. There's the cast there, okay? This is also when it was cleaned up. So I sent the photographs to Jimmy Chilcutt and said, Jimmy, what is this? What kind of creature made this print? Jimmy phoned me and said, hey, it's very strange. Get me the original cast, right? So I said, okay. So I had the cast shipped from Ohio to Texas. Chilcutt got it and he cleaned it up. He took all this dirty dirt off it. It's the way it was. Jody wasn't happy about that. He liked it dirty. But anyway, Chilcutt steam cleaned it or whatever. And then Chilcutt got back to me and said, well, it's the hand of a gorilla. Absolutely, totally, beyond doubt, it is a large hand. As you can see, it's not small. It is the hand of a gorilla. And he got a hold of Dr. Jeff Meldrum, and between the two of them, they agreed, not only by the fingerprints, there's quite a few prints on here, not only by the fingerprints, but by these lines, these funny-looking lines that you see over here. They're called flexion, F-L-E-C-T-I-O-N, flexion lines. Human beings don't have some of these, but gorillas and other chimpanzees and apes do have these strange lines, whereas we don't. Anyway, there's one other strange thing, and that this finger and this finger here are concave. They're pushed in. So when it went down into the ground, those fingers pushed in. So it had to be soft, theoretically, whatever made the print. However, when fingers are concaved like that, it indicates that whatever is making the prints is dead or nearly dead. That's what happens when you start to die. You know how you get all flabby, and that happens. So it was determined that it was possibly a hoax, that somebody got a hold of a gorilla hand and hoaxed the whole thing, because it appears that the gorilla was dead or near death. Now, Jimmy says, I don't know. It's definitely a gorilla's hand. And did somebody get a hold of some artifact and stay? It was good. I had cook go back down and talk to Greer, and he checked them out, and he said, no, Chris, this guy's telling the truth. Look, you know, you can tell, you know, and what did he get out of it? I mean, give me a break. So the whole thing is a bit of a mystery. Now, maybe if this finger went in and hit something like, if it hit a rock, you wouldn't get prints. You see what I mean? You couldn't, when the finger went in, it could have hit hard pan. If it hit hard pan, then you have got a print would register in the hard pan and therefore in the plaster. But if it just hit something hard, it wouldn't produce the fingerprints. So possibly, according to Hancock, I took it out and talked to Hancock. He said it could have hit hard pan, which is a possibility. So I don't know. The mystery Bentonville hand cast. Carrying on, these are other exhibited items that I had in particular. I had all the skulls, and they're now at the Seattle Museum, Groverkrantz, and this particular skull, I got censored on it here. I wanted to put that in the museum, but I was not allowed to put it in. It's a bone clone skull. Here it is here, and it's two halves, and I'm not an anthropologist by any stretch of the imagination, but I know that goes there. I was surprised with this cast. I saw it in the Bone Clones catalog, and, you know, I ordered one. Right? I order all sorts of bones. And because if you look at it a certain way, it looks like it's got a pointed head. It's got very high brow ridges, and you notice it's got a lot of space in here. And gosh, that almost looks like a Bigfoot, right? It's an Aborigine. It's Australian Aborigine, and it was found around the turn of the century. And this was a big guy. You compare this to an ordinary skull, it's quite a bit bigger. And if you look at it, as I say, certain way, like I've got it there, it looks like you've got a pointed head, right? Am I coming apart? Yes. The museum, just a minute now, where's that gone? The museum didn't like me to display anything that had any, is that going to work? Yeah. That had any racial connections, because it draws too much attention. And if they had to put up there that this was an Aborigine skull, then it would point to the fact that the Aborigines are closer to the Sasquatch than what we are, right? So I was told absolutely, definitely not, most emphatically, you may not use that skull in place of that particular skull there. Then that is a plain ordinary skull, that one. So, and I couldn't put real bones in there either. I had to use phony bones because museums don't let you use real bones. That was Robert Bateman's painting of a Yeti, and I got the original from the Hillary Foundation in Toronto, and I was very surprised that they gave it to me. And this was my skull display. I didn't have all these skulls, which I put them up here because they're rather interesting, because Dr. Pai mentioned these the other day, right, or yesterday when we were talking. This is Dr. Krantz's Gigantopithecus. There's a gorilla, there's the human. And these are these other skulls that have been found that appear to have this sagittal crest, right, and which I now refer to as the LPBs, the Lloyd Pie Bigfoot. That's what they are. And I'm very impressed with what Lloyd says. He could really be right. These strange creatures here, they don't seem to be our ancestors. Now, some real good stuff, and I have the Bourtsev statue here. If you want to have a look at it, that is the original Bourtsev statue, and I took it and had it on display along with Robert Bateman painting, the special painting for Dr. Bindernagel, which appeared in a wildlife magazine, and it was a superior painting. It's not very large, but he does depict a Bigfoot, and it's in Meet the Sasquatch, a beautiful painting by Bateman, and I had the original there for that time, and of course I had the Bourtsev statue, which has been buried for about 30 years. I managed to dig it out. And other neat stuff in your tour, that wonderful jacket was Rene Dehinden's Sunday best jacket. He actually wore it once when I took him out to dinner. That's Rene's jacket and his pipe and things like that. There's the computer desk, etc. There's the dermal ridge cast that we were talking about, Matt was talking about, along with the dermal ridges. And this was the Bigfoot nest. And this one really gets me. Was it a Bigfoot nest, or was it a bear's nest or bear bed? Rene Dehinden found it, and I have photographs of him finding it. And he put all this material into a bag, which I thought was a bag. Right? He discovered this in the 70s. I didn't know him yet, but there was all this forest material, and he called it the Bigfoot bed. I remember going over to his place once, and he showed me this big bag full of forest debris, and he said, "That's the Bigfoot bed." And I said, "Well, maybe there's some hair in it or something." "Oh, yeah, maybe these days." And it just sort of sat there. Now he's gone, and then I asked his son, "Could you please let me have the Bigfoot bed for display at the museum?" Make those casts, etc., that were offered for the Kokanee commercial, and unfortunately John couldn't show those very humorous commercials. Now, one thing you don't know is that Rene got the Lotus Award for those commercials, which is a very prestigious award in the movie industry. He got an award, they had him come to a dinner and a whole big, paraphernalia and speeches and everything. Because he was so natural and so uninhibited from those commercials, he got the Lotus Award. It was in the newspaper, it was all over the television, the whole bit. So Rene was an accomplished actor, believe it or not. Believe it or not, he got the Lotus Award. And he was so proud of this too, but he used to laugh and laugh. "I got this award, I got this," as if, Rene de Hinden. And that's Rene and Patterson. Some perhaps have seen that particular shot. This is Rene's ex-wife, and she lives in Hope. She's also interested in the Sasquatch, and she bought that very large carving, and she had a little Sasquatch museum. Her name is Wanja, W-A-N-J-A, Wanja. I just talked to her the other day. That's her little Sasquatch museum in Hope. She hasn't got it open right now. She's gone over to Europe, but she bought this carving, and she put it in her museum, and that is she and I up in Hope just a couple of years ago. But Rene, he got so enthralled with the Sasquatch, and perhaps you know this, but he just left everything. He left it, just decided. He just told his wife, "Look, I've got to go search for that thing. You just have to do the best you can." And she was a very responsible lady, and she understood, and she got a job, and she supported the family. I guess Rene must have given her a few bucks, but he didn't make much. He didn't make very much, believe me. But he just decided that he wanted to dedicate his entire life to searching for this creature, and he just couldn't stop no matter what he did. So eventually he left his wife and the 2 children. I've talked to her at length, as you can appreciate, and he went to search for the Sasquatch. Roger Patterson was almost the same. Do you know that? Looking into his background, he got so enthralled with Bigfoot that he did everything he could, in that quest, and overlooked the needs of his family. That's how come those debts got run up. And if you look at all those debts that you see in particular books about what Roger Patterson had run, you'll see that those debts are associated with the drugstore, the cleaner, the hospital. That was Pat Patterson getting attention for her family, right? So some people get a little too enthusiastic about Bigfoot. Oh, here I do have it. Sorry, there is the Bigfoot nest, and those are the 3 bags. That was the first bag. That's Rene with the nest there under the cedar tree. It comes out down here. And there's the first bag, forest floor. There's the second bag. Sorry, that's the second bag. You can see it's all 12 to 14 inches twigs. And that's the third bag, which had all the grass and everything on it. Now, people were sent down there to look at this, and they said, "It's a bear. We can find scratch marks. We can find poop. We can find all sorts of things. It's a bear." However, Rene went to his grave insisting it was not a bear. So there you are. And a lot of artwork on display, and Paul Smith was kind enough to lend me some of his art for the exhibit, and I had it on display, his wonderful art. This one in particular is particularly good, The Usual Suspects. And Rob Roy Menzies, I don't know if you know about him, but he allowed me to display his depiction of frame 352 of the film, which is that head, which is very, very good in real life. It's really wonderful. He did a great job. So I had some very nice artwork on display. I also had what we called the Penny Burnham mask, and that's one of the masks. And when I was doing this exhibit, I decided, or found out, that I really didn't have any good sculptures other than the Bourtsev sculpture of the creature. So my son came to me and said, "Dad, I see some lady down, why don't you get a local artist and make you some heads of some sort?" And I said, "Well, you find an artist, and I'll ask her." And he went down to Granville Island, and he saw some stuff on display, left a note. Next day, I got a call from a lady saying, "Yes, I'd be glad to help you with your exhibit." And she is a very famous artist, lives in Vancouver. I gave her the Patterson film to look at. I gave her all my photographs, and some months later, she created what I call the Burnham Heads. And there's 4 of them altogether. 3 of them are down in Seattle right now, and the other one is here. And she made all of them a little different, because she reasoned, as we have reasoned, that this creature does have different features. It's not like, you know, dogs and cats all look alike. It does look different. It is different. It's not all out of the same mold. You know, noses are big, noses are small, lips are big, chins, and the whole bit. So there are 4 individual sculptures that she made. A very lovely lady. I think I have a photograph of her here. And that is she and I out at her place with her finished heads. That's Lynn holding up one of the heads. And that is Lynn Miranda, and it's Penny Burnham and Lynn Miranda, the curator of anthropology with the Vancouver Museum, and those were the 4 heads. It took her a long time to make them. It was months. I'd gone over there several times, and she'd show me what she was doing, and it was really amazing. I want to get into this mathematics and size business again, but here I took that wood fragment, there it is there, and said, okay, if the wood fragment is 26 inches, how big is the foot? And I came up with 14.8 inches. That's how big the foot is. The footprints are measured at 14.5. So I'm out 0.3, okay? And if I use that, I come up with 83.74 inches for the height of the creature. I don't know what else to say, you know. I mean, it sort of works out. And I did all sorts of calculations based on it. And, you know, I can go around in circles with all this math, which I'm not going to do. And then, of course, we have the famous Mr. Long and Mr. Hieronymus, and I have written that up in the Bigfoot film controversy, which shows you that the creature, to my opinion, and this is Rick Knowles' stuff here, that the creature was somewhat different in appearance to Mr. Hieronymus. In other words, Mr. Hieronymus' legs are too long and his arms are too short. Now, you can always make an arm longer, but it's pretty hard a leg shorter unless you're going to walk in a trench, right? So if you look at this, it doesn't match up. And that's how big the creature would have to be in order to have a leg the same size as Hieronymus. It would have to be way up here. And he couldn't even see out the helmet, correct? Now, I can also see things that a lot of people can't see, but I guess it's me, but sometimes to say you're seeing things, but I believe that I can see that creature's eye. Okay, and I swear I can see an eye in there. I swear I can see an eyeball. I swear I can see a yellow eye. I swear I can, but maybe I can't. Right? When I got photographs and I got all this neat stuff like everybody else, right? I got the real stuff, not digital, the other stuff, right? And if you blow these things up and do all these neat things, well, somehow. Now, actually, when I made that print or that artwork, I actually did that on an original. I actually colored a photograph, and as you can see, I got a perfect eye, right? Perfect, and that is that eye, right? I didn't do nothing to it. I just kind of tweaked it a bit, right? And I've tweaked this around here a bit and tweaked it to make it, and the mouth was open here. You can see that's its mouth there, right? And I also think there's some teeth in here. Hey, Dr. D again, right? Murphy says you can see this and see that. I got letters, right, from Yale, and we sent him stuff 10 years ago, and his students are saying, we can see teeth. And he's saying, yes, my students can see teeth, right, from Yale, Dr. D. And he tells me, hey, you know, you're seeing things, right? Well, okay, I'm seeing things. But it does appear to me that eye. Now, you will notice one thing about that eye. In my opinion, it's in the corner. It's not looking straight ahead. It's off in the corner. Now, I did a model. That model over there, it's got real glass eyes. And if you stand in front of that model, it will look at you. Because it's got glass eyes, right? Convex eyes. Not concave, convex. And light hits them. And you can go up here, and that creature will be looking at you, and you can go all the way down here, and that creature will still look at you, because the light is going to hit that convex, not concave, eyeball, because it's a glass eye. It's a real glass eye. Right? It's going to hit you, and he will look at you. You can do anything you want in front, but as soon as you go over here, he looks that way. He looks that way. He does not look at you. He will not look. The only way you can get him to look at you over here is to block off the light. Now it'll come that way, and it'll bounce back on you. Stand in front of him and let him look at you. If you give him a kiss, it's good luck, too. Anyway, now the story is that Patterson took a glass eye from Hieronymus, and he had a helmet, and with a wad of clay, you know, sort of like the good Lord, right? Stuck an eye in there, right? And we have a perfect match. You know how long it took me to get those eyes in that thing? We also have the opinion from Dr. Dingeling and also others about the creature in the Patterson film being a man in long underwear, in tight long underwear, to which hair has been glued. Did you read that? Huh? Back in the 50s, we used to have long underwear because we didn't have central heating, right? I wore a pair, and there's a few other people in here that were around there. I'm not going to point to you, right? Back in the 50s, didn't have central heating, so we wore long underwear. Had a little flap at the back, right? And as you got older, your parents didn't usually keep up to date, so those underwear got tighter and tighter, right? If you're about 12 and you're wearing underwear that, you know, the legs are up to your knees here, right? Anyway, so he says, well, we didn't have spandex back in the 50s, 60s, but we had long underwear, and it could have been hair glued onto long underwear. Have you ever tried to glue hair on anything? I mean, seriously. You know how long it took me to glue that hair on this little model? About 4 days. I had to do it one tuft at a time. I went out and bought 3 wigs from Value Village, right? And sat there and glued the hair on that little model. One little tuft at a time. And nowadays, when you glue, you have the advantage that you use glue that does not show. It dries perfectly. Back in the 60s, you didn't have that stuff. If I had to use that stuff back in, this would be all globbed. You know how glue goes when it globs, that white stuff? So to even mention that the creature is a man in long, tight underwear to which fur or hair has been glued is an absolute absurdity. Absolute. And I've written on this. I mean, that's ridiculous. On top of that, he tells lies. Some of the artwork in there he has made faked. And I've written to him and said that is bordering on deception. And as a PhD, you should not do that. The footprint that he has in there, he had one of his artists draw it, and he actually drew it like a fake print, right? Like the Wallace. I've got the actual photograph he should have used. He didn't ask me for a thing. He just went and did what he wanted to do. And his drawings are dubbed to make them look fake. Why didn't he use some Patterson film frames? Why didn't he ask? He didn't. He had drawings done. Too cheap. Anyway, this is the creature's leg, and I got it in the film controversy. That's my leg, and you can see behind the creature's leg. Right there. It's my leg, and that's Patty's leg. I had a hell of a time taking that photograph, right? Because I'm alone. I had to bend over backwards, believe me. But that's my leg. And you see I got one of those. I don't know what we call that. I call it a tendon. Is it a tendon or a sinew? I don't know. Something. But I got 2. There's one in here somewhere too. But that is that one there for sure. Now, that's my son's leg, right? He was a bodybuilder. He was Mr. BC, okay? Third. I paid for it, so I know, right? Some years ago. Massive bodybuilder. Massive guy. 260 pounds. Great big legs and the whole bit, right? So I took pictures of him. Now, whatever that is, that big muscle go down there, looks like that one to me, right? And I didn't draw this in here, but there's a calf. You see that there? That's my son's, and that matches this one down here. Now, that does not look like me, a man in long underwear. It just doesn't look like a man in long underwear. And if it was, we've got Hieronymus telling us that not only did he wear a suit, but he wore his clothes under the suit, right? He wore his clothes. How are you going to get that kind of detail? That is the heel from the creature. You can see a nice heel here. That's the heel in the back of the leg. You can see that in the film frame. Just a few more to go, folks, okay? And here, that is real Bluff Creek film site soil, and we were talking about soil the other day. And in a lot of areas where that thing walked, you can see all the footprints there. And I got some of that soil. And I think Dan Perez mentioned once that soil is called serpentine. It has a name. It's kind of got clay and sand and little rocks in it. But I tell you, you make a footprint in that and press down hard, which I did, and it's like clay. It stays there. And it would stay there for a hell of a long time. And it's pretty damn sturdy, that stuff. And I do think that those prints in that kind of soil would put up with a fair chunk of weather. Even if it rained, those prints would stay there. That soil is like clay. And I've worked with clay, as you can see. It's just like clay. It sticks. You can stick your hand right in it. Right? Now, not all of it is like that. There's rocks over here. But where I believe that creature walked right through there, and they got those prints, they lucked out. It kind of walked into a certain area at the back there, right? And it is all that kind of soil. And you can see these are just people walking, so you're getting some good prints there. And I've looked at that soil. This is the hernia in the leg, and we've heard about the hernia. It's in the film. Now, that was discovered many years ago, because I want to correct the record on this. Igor Bourtsev in Russia discovered that back in the 70s. He did not call it a hernia. He explains it all in Markotik's book. He called it, because of the way, I'm getting technical here, the way the creature walks is such, because it walks with kind of bended knees, right? The way that it walks is such that it would need a muscle in this area. Now, don't catch me up on all that, because I'm not into anthropology, anatomy and all that, but the way he explains it, that is a muscle that the creature would naturally have because it walks in this odd way, right? So that bulge there, and you can see it going in and out. As you see the creature going across the screen, you can see it kind of bulging out if you look at it. So it was found later, rediscovered some couple of years ago, High-Check and White Wolf Productions. They rediscovered it, and they called it a hernia. Well, it could be a hernia. Maybe Dr. Meldon will spell us out a bit on that. Other things that I notice in the film is that this fat moves around in here. As that creature walks, you see this fat. It's got the hair down here is not too thick. I don't know why, right? It's got fat, though. It's kind of fat. And you can see this fat moving in here, like rippling. They call it plasticity. I'll leave that to Jeff. Anyway, there's that kind of thing going on. And, of course, some comments are made about the foot. And a foot is that this arch is on the wrong side. But that's just the way the camera is. I mean, there's the foot, and there's the cast. It's the same foot. Two more. Okay, one point that I made in the book, and I was kind of surprised about this, but, you know, that is the creature's foot there. That is the film frame, and that is a very large chimpanzee's foot. Okay, and you can see it is kind of white. It's not really white, but when you take photographs of it, it seems to come up kind of white, so it makes it whiter or whatever. But that is a real... Now, you can say, hey, look, looks like it's got a boot on here, folks. There's the top of the boot. Okay, here's the chimpanzee. Okay, folks, looks like it's got a boot. There's the top of the boot. I guarantee you that chimpanzee was not wearing boots, okay? I don't think it was wearing boots. But you can tell that it's kind of, I mean, I'm not calling the Bigfoot creature a chimpanzee, right? But I'm calling it some kind of a primate that has a foot probably like a primate, you know, those funny-looking toes and all that, right? And that appears to me to be very close. Now, there's other shots that are taken of the film where it's kind of got a squared-off heel. If I was to take that chimpanzee's foot, people say, oh, that squared-off heel, it's got to be a slipper. I guarantee you in 5 minutes I could take that heel and position it in such a way I could get that heel to look like that. It's just the way the photograph is taken. That is that foot. It's the same foot. Now, one other thing before I go here is that we are told that that particular creature was made from horsehair. That Patterson killed a red horse, shot it, killed it, skinned it, and made a costume. But there's two scenarios. It was not only a horse hide, it was also this other ridiculous thing with that other insane Morris. Yeah, you know, I asked him if I could use some of his stuff. You know what he did? No, with a copy to his attorney, okay? No, you may not use anything of mine, and copied his attorney, right? Because I wanted to put his stuff up, right? So I would have put it up, but I don't even know the guy. Anyway, what does a horse look like? What does horse hair look like? Go out and find a horse. So I went out and found a horse. I said, there's a horse, right? I went out and took a picture of it, right? I took a picture of a horse, and that's what horse hair looks like. That's horse's hide. That's horse's hide. I just walked up to that horse there, went out and find a farm. I said, you got a nice horse here? You got a red horse here? Yeah. I said, I want to take a picture of him. I want to see horse hide on the hoof, and there it is. It's kind of fine fur. You touch a horse, and it's like whiskers. It's very hard, fine fur. It's a nice horse. He didn't kick me like he kicked Gimlin. But I just went up there and I took that picture. Gimlin knows all about horses. But anyway, and when I compared the two, I don't see any similarity between this, and you don't glue hair on a horse. You don't glue horse hair on. And this here, I just don't see any similarity at all. So it definitely wasn't horse's hide. That's what horse's hide looked like. I got lots of shots of this horse from all over. I got one from back here that I'm going to send from Greg Long, to Greg Long. Anyway, one other thing about horses, I mentioned this to Autumn Williams, and I'm going to mention it all to you, okay? One of the things, Bob Gimlin and Patterson, right? They went in there on horses. And they didn't have all this electronic gizmo with them. They have one of those cameras that you wind up. I got one, right? It's really neat. You don't need batteries for those things. They'll run for about 2 or 3 minutes. You don't need a battery. You just wind it up. It's got a big spring in there, and then you just, and that camera just goes. And eventually, end the winding, and you got to wind it back up again, and then you go for the next couple of feet or whatever the case may be. Now, Dave Hancock, a zoologist, has pointed out to me something, and he pointed out that when a man is on a horse walking through the wilderness, he is like part of that whole scene. It's not like on one of these things, you know, revving around, what do you call them, ATVs, all-terrain vehicles? It's not the same thing. And you're not smelt, okay, on a horse. Horses are a part of nature, and they can kind of... And a man on a horse is sort of accepted as part of the horse. They don't kind of look twice. You're kind of taken as a man. As soon as you get off the horse, it's a different story altogether, totally. As soon as you get off a horse, you're a man. When you're on a horse, you're part of that horse. And part of this may have been why the creature at Buff Creek didn't run away when those two guys came up on horseback. You probably saw them, right? And then, when later on, when they got off the horse, that's why it was so concerned, right? So I am saying that if we're going to get into the wilderness looking for this creature, the probability of finding it will probably be better if we don't go in there with all these neat electronic gizmos, that we just go in there with the basics, just like Jane Goodall, which Autumn pointed out the other day, a watch, right? A wind-up camera, and a good old-fashioned horse. Thank you.